our final presenter, I hate that word final, I'm just going to say the next presenter, all right, is Jim Janus. Now, Jim Janus is a writer of poetry and short fiction. In 2014, he won the Waukegan Public Library's 30th annual Ray Bradbury Creative Contest with his story, Freedom Stream. RG Productions performed a live theater version of his story in March of 2015. Visit jimswriting.com to read his work. Help me welcome Jim Janus.
Can everybody hear me? Yep. Last time I was here, I told a story about fishing in a pond in Poland's land of 2,000 lakes. That story was from my prior marriage. Tonight's story takes place more recently. In 2008, I was living alone in my house not far from here. And on Saturdays, I'd meet up with a group of storytellers of sorts. In a professional building, in one of its suites, we'd sit in a circle in chairs arranged in a circle, and each person would take a turn telling a true story about a difficult time they got through. And in that group of storytellers, I met Vilja. And after those meetings, Vilja and I would go out to dinner, and we would tell more stories about the good times, about my growing up in Chicago's northwest suburbs, and her growing up in Lithuania. And 3 years later, in the summer of 2011, Vilja and I got engaged. And our plan was for that next summer to go to Lithuania and to get married in the Catholic Church. There was just one thing I needed to make this happen: an annulment. Now, annulments take a long time, and I started the process before I proposed to Vilja. So that next summer, in July, I got a letter from the church. And I read the letter, and it said, "After careful evaluation, nullity has been proven." Excellent. However, there's a review that's mandatory, and it could take up to 4 months. Well, this just pushed our summer wedding into November. So Vilja and I were disappointed, but we just revised our plan. We said, okay, we'll get married here in the States as soon as we can, and then next summer we'll go to Lithuania. So a few more months went by, and then in October, I got another letter from the church. And this letter said, "The church declares the marriage null. Finally. However, before James can get married in the Catholic Church, the bishop must grant his permission 4 months prior to any proposed marriage." The bishop? In 4 months? This now put our November marriage into February. Well, Vilja and I were crushed. Now, I knew that the church was just looking out for me. They didn't want me to rush into something. But Vilja and I were sure of each other. But it was also important for us to get married in the church, so we didn't really know what to do. So I went to the place that has all the answers, the internet. And I looked some things up, and I wrote some notes down, and then I took my plan to Vilja, and I said, hey, we can get married legally in a courthouse, and then after that, we can ask our pastor to bless our marriage. Now, Vilja loved this idea. She said, that's how we do it in Lithuania. In Lithuania, the church, or the couple goes to the courthouse, and they get legally married there, and right after they go to the Catholic Church and they celebrate Mass. There are just a couple wrinkles for me with this plan. So in my family, everybody gets married in the church. Nobody gets married in the courthouse. And secondly, there was no guarantee that the church would bless our marriage. So I told Vilja, I said, I'm not going to tell my family about this court wedding. So a few weeks later, excuse me, on a Saturday in November in the morning, Vilya and I got dressed up. So I put on a dress shirt, and tied on a tie, and put on a sport jacket. And then Vilya put on the gold dress that she spent so much time picking out at Nordstrom's. And then our friends Paul and Clarisse came over to the house. And as Paul was preparing to take a picture, Vilya pulled from her bouquet a few tiny red roses, and she pinned them together onto the lapel of my jacket. And after a few more pictures, we left for the courthouse. So as I'm driving to the courthouse, Paul and Clarisse are reminiscing because a few years before, they too got married at the courthouse. And they did it on a weekday. And Paul mentioned that they were pleased with the judge and how she conducted their exchanging of the vows. And then Vilya told Paul and Clarisse about how they do these marriages in the courtroom in Lithuania. And she said that there's fresh cut flowers in vases, and they pipe in Mendelssohn. And the clerks that work in the court, they're all dressed up like they're part of the wedding party. And there's a red carpet that makes its way, that runs up to the judge. And Vilya finishes this description by saying, it's like the Oscars. So at about 9:15 that Saturday morning, we arrive at 18 North County Street in Waukegan. And we walk up the concrete steps to the 19th Judicial Circuit Court of Lake County. And I pull on the door, and it's locked. And on the glass is a sign, and it says, on Saturdays, please use the entrance on 20 South County Street. So the four of us walk the one block south, and over that entrance, it says, in big capital letters attached to the outside, the Robert H. Babcock's Justice Center. And I'm looking at this building, and it's pretty tall, and then it hits me. Vilya and I are about to get married at the Lake County Jail. So we push our way through the revolving door, and inside this guard orders us to empty our pockets and take off our belts and our shoes. So we do that, we walk through the metal detector, and on the other side we put ourselves together, and then there's a guard at a folding table, and he takes our marriage license, and then he says, how do you guys want to get married? How do we want to get married? He goes, yeah, in a group or privately. So like, privately. So he says, okay, here's how it works. The weddings will begin once court business wraps up. And then we'll do the group weddings first, and after that we'll do the private weddings. And everything's got to be done by 11:30 because we close at 11:30. So then Paul and Clarisse, we wait in this lobby, standing in this lobby with like at least 30 other people. So there's all these other brides and grooms, and some of the brides are wearing full bridal gowns, a few of them, and their grooms are in tuxes. Other people are kind of dressed up. A lot of people in their street clothes. They're all standing around waiting. And then after about an hour, we see this guy coming down a young guy coming from the hallway leading away from the courtroom. And he's got like a dirty t-shirt on and jeans and gym shoes. And he looks like he's been up all night. And he's heading towards the door, he's heading towards the exit, but he's carrying this clear plastic bag. And in the plastic bag are like wallet and keys, his personal belongings. This guy had just been released from prison. And about 20 minutes later, another guy, the same thing, weaving through the grooms and the brides. So, I don't know, it's about 10:45, and the bailiff starts calling groups of names for people to get married. And I think it was around 11 o'clock we get called. Well, they call Hernandez, Rodriguez, Ramirez, Janus. So we follow the bailiff in this group through this hallway to courtroom 120. It actually was like a viewing room for courtroom 120. So there's these long benches, hardwood benches, kind of like church pews. So we slide into these church pews, the whole group, and we're facing this pane of thick glass. And on the other side of the thick glass is a courtroom. And taped to this thick glass are 8.5 by 11 like colored sheets of paper, a few of them. And they all have like in bold print these warnings printed on them, like no banging on the glass, shirts must be tucked in, absolutely no communicating with the prisoners. This was not going to be like the Oscars. So we're sitting there and looking through the window. We could see the group that got called before us. They're getting married in a group. And then I realized, like, in a couple of minutes, this will be us. Villia and I will be in there with this group that we're sitting in, getting married in a group. And at that moment, I thought just quickly about bailing out. I still wanted to marry Villia, but maybe we could do this legal marriage thing a little differently. But then I looked over at Villia, and she was smiling, and she was holding her bouquet. And at that moment, the other group was coming out of the courtroom and the bailiff called us to go in. So we followed the bailiff in, and the judge was standing there in his black gown in the middle of this room, and then we all the couples kind of went around him in a semicircle. There were maybe like 4 or 5 couples. And then he started the ceremony, do you ladies take this gentleman, etc., and do you gentlemen take these ladies? And, in a few minutes, Villia and I were married. So we left the Babcock's Justice Center, and Paula Clares and I, we drove into Lake Forest, and we celebrated with an early dinner. And then 3 months later, in March, the 4 of us got back together at St. Mary's Catholic Church in Kenosha, and the pastor blessed our marriage. And my mom and dad were there too. Aww. And then that summer, Villia and I traveled to Lithuania, and we vacationed with her family at a Baltic seaside town called Šventoy. And we stayed in this group of small wooden cottages. And they were on this open lawn of green grass. And in the center of this lawn was a gazebo, and it was made out of tree limbs. And underneath the thatched roof, on our first evening there, we had a celebration dinner of shish kebab and white rice and cucumbers and dark bread. And before dessert, Villia's sister Lima presented us with a linen stole. And this was embroidered in yellow and green and red. And it said our names, Villia and James. And it had 2012 on there, the year of our court wedding. And as the family looked on, Lima draped this stole around Villia and me, and then she said a few words of blessing. And then the family toasted us with champagne, and then they took out the traditional Lithuanian wedding cake. And as the night went on, we could smell the sea air, and we could hear the waves crashing on the beach. And we drank, and we laughed, and we told stories. And that, for Villia and me, was better than the Oscars.
How many of you can relate to that story? Show of hands. Oh, wow.